Ask yourself this question. Why is Georgia over 10.5 wins not a great bet? Answer, you don't have one. I think it is a great bet because I go through Georgia's schedule and I don't know who's stopping them here. Do we all remember? Let's, Joker style, wind the clocks back a year. Nick Saban's still the coach at Alabama, and Kirby Smart and Georgia have just won back-to-back national championships, and they go through the regular season at, wait for it, 12-0. They get to the SEC title game, they fall in a competitive battle with the Crimson Tide to Nick Saban. Saban isn't there anymore. So Georgia faced one obstacle last year. Now, not every game was really easy, right? Auburn gave him a little bit of a scare and whatnot. But I just think about Georgia and where they're at as a program, where they're at going into this year, and just keep asking myself, who is going to stop these guys? Because they open with Clemson on August 31st. One of the games of the year. Two of Georgia's first 4 games in 2024 are going to be among the biggest, most hyped games in all of college football. They occur week 1 there, August 31st against Clemson. That's at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta of what we're going to call a neutral site game. Call it what you will. And then in week 5, they're off a bye playing at Alabama in Tuscaloosa, where Kalen DeBoer is now the head coach. Sandwich in between, they've got Tennessee Tech. I think they'll win that one. And then they go at Kentucky. So kind of a tough start there for Georgia. They are playing just one game in their home stadium in their first 4 games. What does that mean? Well, it's going to be a little bit loaded with the home schedule in the back half, including each of their final 3 games of the regular season. Now, Georgia's schedule is one of the toughest in the SEC, but my confidence in Georgia seems to just be growing by the day because I've been thinking about this for a while now and figured today was as good as any to, talk about it here on the show. They're going to be favored in that game at Alabama. I don't know by how much, but I think they're going to be favored. In fact, FanDuel might even have that game. We'll check on that in a moment. They come back home. They host Auburn. They host Mississippi State. I'm not picking an upset in either of those particular spots. Why? Because I just don't see Georgia losing at home. By the way, week 1 in that game against Clemson, it's going to be a big game. Big opportunity for Dabo Swinney right there. What do you think is the betting line in that game? Georgia at Alabama, just for reference, Georgia at Alabama is Georgia minus 3.5. Yeah, it's Georgia minus 12.5 against Clemson. Yikes. I've seen bigger statistical upsets happen against what Vegas thinks the betting line should be, but that's a big old number for the Georgia Bulldogs. So after they take on Auburn and Mississippi State, they go at Texas, and then they play Florida. So that's not an easy stretch. That's not a gimme. By the way, they've got a bye sandwiched in between Texas and Florida. Then they go at Ole Miss, where they will also be a slight underdog, or sorry, a smaller favorite than they will be at in other games, which really feels sometimes like you're an underdog if you're Georgia. Then they host Tennessee. They host UMass. We got to get rid of those late season cupcakes, man. And then they host Georgia Tech. That's win, and win for me there to end the year. I think they're going to start with at least 3 wins, possibly 4. That game is going to tell us a lot. That game against Alabama, if Georgia goes in favored by 3.5 points and the line stays there, and they win that game, let's say, for instance, by 10 to 13 points, and they're kind of comfortably ahead, that Alabama roster that certainly took some losses early in the offseason has rebounded in a big way with Kalen DeBoer and company and the way they've utilized the transfer portal. That's going to be one of the 10 best rosters in college football. I don't think Bama's top 5. I think they're probably in the 6 to 10 range. But you give a top 6 to 10 roster to Kalen DeBoer, boy, that game might just come down to quarterback play. Now, I like Georgia's more than Alabama's because I think Carson Beck is a bona fide stud. This is a Carson Beck fan show. I think that guy is absolutely awesome behind center. One of the best in the country, is one of the betting favorites to win the Heisman Trophy, and he absolutely should be. I think you can make the case the hardest game on this Georgia schedule is at Texas on October 19th, because Texas has got what's my rule on the show? For my everydayers out there, One of my consistent themes, of which I have many, presidents vote on realignment, not athletic directors and such, but I am going to almost always lean towards a team who returns the same coach, the same quarterback, and the same offense coordinator. Georgia and Texas have these things in common. Do you realize that? Steve Sarkisian is the offensive coordinator. And then Mike Bobo is back for Georgia as the offensive coordinator down there in Athens. So again, coach, offensive coordinator, quarterback, all returning. I can make the case those are the two best teams in the SEC, Georgia and Texas. A classic SEC pair of teams if I've ever seen one. But I just go through this schedule and think, okay, in all likelihood, Georgia's going to be favored in every single game that they will play. Maybe they're an underdog at Texas. Vegas has got them right now. FanDuel's got them as a 1.5-point favorite at Texas. So that's pretty slight. That's pretty close to a pickup. And no one wins every game in which they're favored. I don't expect, because of the tough nature of the schedule, at Texas, at Ole Miss, and at Alabama, you're probably losing at least one of those games. But I just continue to think about how good Kirby Smart is and how good Georgia's roster is and where this program was a year ago. I think somehow it kind of feels like Georgia is not being forgotten, but not being treated in the same way that they would had that game against Alabama gone differently. Because last year, Georgia played in a bowl game that many people disregarded and didn't watch because they blasted Florida State into oblivion. I think what happened in that game is actually illegal in 48 states. So I think for the Bulldogs, they come into this year still feeling supremely confident. They've still got a 13-win season under their belt from last year. They've still got 2 national championships in the last 3 seasons. They've still got a Heisman caliber quarterback and one of the 3 or 4 best rosters in all of college football, maybe the best roster in all of college football. Certainly you can look at, how are you going to replace weapons like Lab McConkey or Brock Bowers, but I don't think that's going to be a major problem. And I don't worry about it at a place like Georgia when you've got a quarterback like Carson Beck. That's far more important. Quarterback makes receivers far more often than receivers make a quarterback, right? Sometimes you have that, right? Sometimes you've got Tyreek Hill and Tua Tagovailoa. Tua is aided tremendously by having Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. And it turns out Mac Jones was also aided by having guys like Devontae Smith in college, and I believe Jaden Waddle was on that receiving corps. So those are really tough road games. At Texas, at Alabama, at Ole Miss, I think they lose. I don't see how they lose 2. I really don't. I am that confident in this Georgia team. I just think that they are so well set up to have another high-level, high-volume win season. I think over 10.5 is indeed the side with the Bulldogs, and I just don't know who's slowing them down from getting into the playoff. Do you know what Georgia is to make the playoff right now? I'm gonna give you a second to guess what Georgia is to make the playoff. I'll give you a hint. They're the shortest odds of anybody in the country. Yeah, that's right. -500. -500. For those not familiar with what that means, allow me to explain. If you had a bet of around -110, that would be pretty close to what Vegas sees as a 50-50 proposition. Georgia's -500 to make the playoff. You only have to win 10 games in the SEC or the Big Ten to make the college football playoff in all likelihood. 11 assuredly gets you in. 10 most likely gets you in, but not guaranteed. And if you win 12, well, yeah, that's an automatic, of course. And I just don't see how you're going to have, there are some great teams in the SEC. I've talked about them here. I don't see how they are going to all be able to get a good enough crack at Georgia to keep them out of the playoff. I think Georgia's a lock to make it. -500 is where they should be. And I think they're a lock to go over 10.5 wins because I think that roster, that coach, that quarterback, remember, they were just one game short of having a chance to play for a national championship. So they've got a little chip on their shoulder. They've got a revenge tour element to them. And that is a dangerous football team. And I don't think anybody in the SEC can stop them from reaching the playoff. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.